Hello everyone, welcome back to the thetechyned vlog. And so, yes, we are still on sprint. Today we are going into the sprint planning. So, sprint planning initiates the sprint by laying out the work to be performed for the sprint. So, the sprint planning is just like an avenue of laying the foundation for whatever that is going to happen in the sprint. Okay, this resulting plan is created by the collaborative work of the entire Scrum team. So everyone in the Scrum team is involved in this. The product owner ensures that the attendees are prepared to discuss the most important product backlog items and how they map to the product goal. So the product owner ensures that everyone who needs to be there is there, and also how whatever that has been discussed is mapped towards the product goal. So the Scrum team may also invite other people to attend sprint planning to provide advice. Maybe people that may have one or two things to add, so that they can be able to contribute towards the sprint planning. So sprint planning addresses the following topics. Topic one: why is sprint valuable? So what we are doing, why is it valuable? The product owner proposes how the product could increase its value and utility in the current sprint. So the product owner proposes how this sprint would how the product could increase its value and utility in the current sprint. The whole Scrum team then collaborates to define a sprint goal. So everybody comes together to say, okay, let's look at our sprint. Let's name our sprint goal. Then define a sprint goal that communicates why the sprint is valuable to stakeholders. So you have a sprint goal, we discuss why this is valuable to our stakeholders. The sprint goal must be finalized prior to the end of the sprint planning. So make sure you finalize your sprint goal towards the end of the sprint planning. Then topic two is what can be done this sprint? What do we want to do this sprint? Remember, the first one is why is this sprint valuable, important. So through the discussion with the product owner, the developers select items from the product backlog to include in the current sprint. So when the developers must have, had the conversation with the product owner, he explains and all whatnot, they now know what to, pull out of the backlog into the current sprint. The Scrum team may refine these items during this process, which increases understanding and confidence. Okay, so selecting how much can be completed within a sprint may be challenging. Certainly. However, the more the developers know about their past performance, their upcoming capacity, and their definition of done, the more confident they will be in their sprint forecast. So it's not easy to say, oh, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. But by the time we know what we have done, what we need to do, that's the definition of done, what can we say that we would, at what point can we get to this product and we say we have the definition of done met. Okay, so that gives them more confidence on how they can forecast that, okay, we are going to do this, we're going to use this time to do this and all that. Now, topic three, how will the chosen work get done? Now, for each selected product backlog item, the developers plan the work necessary to create an increment that makes the definition of done. So, from what has been, put in the product backlog, from what the developers plan to work, so they use this to, plan whatever needs to be done to meet increment or meet definition of done. This is often done by decomposing product backlog items into smaller work items of 1 day or less. That's breaking down the product backlog items, okay, to the barest minimum into maybe 1 day of work and all whatnot. How this is done is at the sole discretion of developers. Nobody, interferes. They are the ones that will do the work. They know how to break it down. No one else tells them how to turn product backlog items into incremental value. So we don't interfere. So the sprint goal, the product backlog items select the sprint goal, the product backlog items selected for the sprint, plus the plan for delivering them are together referred to as the sprint backlog. So what makes up the sprint backlog? Inside the sprint backlog, we have our sprint goal. What do we want to achieve in this sprint? The product backlog item, we have the product, put in the product backlog by the product owner, items, and then the items selected for the sprint. So when you have the product owner putting those works into the product backlog as the product backlog items, you know that the developers will now come and pull whatever needs to be done in that sprint from the product backlog item, from what the product owner has already explained, okay? Plus the plan for delivering them. Now, the developers now come forward with a plan that this is how we are going to deliver this. All of this from the sprint backlog. And remember that for the sprint planning, we have why is the sprint important, what can be done this sprint, and how will the chosen work get done. So sprint planning is time boxed to a maximum of 8 hours for 1 month. So if it's going to be 1 month sprint, it's going to be 8 hours. For shorter sprint, the event is usually shorter. Just to summarize the sprint planning for you. So it's just like this. So before the sprint planning, there are activities that will be done, maybe refinement of the backlog and all whatnot. On that day, every the product owner makes sure that everyone is invited. Who needs to be there? It's there, supported by the Scrum Master. He comes forward to say this is what we need to achieve in the sprint. Then the Scrum team now comes forward with a sprint goal. Now, what would happen is we've had this explanation of this is what we want to achieve. The developers will now retire to pull what needs to be used to achieve what the product owner needs to be achieved in that sprint from the backlog. Then they now give it a plan. Then they now come forward, to present what they have. Okay, so this is how we're going to achieve this. You say this is what you need to achieve and all whatnot. So, and then inside the sprint planning, the sprint planning is time boxed for 8 hours. It could be shorter for other sprints, but at the same time, know that in the sprint planning, what makes the sprint backlog up is the sprint goal, the product backlog items selected by the sprint for the sprint, plus the plan to deliver them. Now, let's move to the daily scrum. The purpose of the daily scrum is to inspect progress towards the sprint goal. So make sure that we are meeting each day to say, okay, we now have a sprint goal. How far are we from achieving the sprint goal? And then adapt the sprint backlog as necessary. Okay, let's look at our sprint backlog. Are we achieving this task? Are we, ticking off like off on this task? Are we doing what needs to be done? Are there blockers? Then adjusting the upcoming planned work. The daily scrum is a 15-minute event for the developers of the scrum team. To reduce complexity, it is held at the same time and place every working day of the sprint. This is done every day, 15 minutes. If it's possible, you just stand up and do it. If the product owner or scrum master are actively working on items in the sprint backlog, they participate as developers. Okay, so developers can select whatever structure and technique they want as long as the daily scrum focuses on the progress towards the sprint goal. So no matter the structure, technique, or whatever the developers want to take, the main thing is to focus on the daily scrum. Make sure it's within the 15 minutes. Make sure whatever you need to bring forward, you bring it forward. Or how it's supposed to be held, it's held. And produces an actionable plan for the next day of work. This creates focus and improves self-management. So if daily scrum is done with the way it's supposed to be done, it creates focus and also improves self-management, because you guys are having that discussion. You guys are saying, okay, we need to do this tomorrow. Tomorrow you do what you need to do, and you remember that you watch each other's back. So daily scrums improve communications because you guys are meeting each day, you guys are talking each day, getting used to one another or each other. Identify impediment. Oh, I'm having issues. You tell the scrum master goes ahead to help you, unblocks you. Now promote quick decision making. Since you're meeting each day, you are able to communicate your issues, you're able to communicate what you want to do, and you're able to even bring something forward for brainstorming, and consequently eliminate the need for other meetings. Yes, when you are meeting each day for 15 minutes, there you are able to do what needs to be done. Why would you need other meetings? Okay. The daily scrum is not the only time developers are allowed to adjust their plan. Yes, developers, they work together, they meet anytime. But the thing is, the daily scrum is when everyone in the team come together. Okay. So they often meet throughout the day for more detailed discussion about adapting or replanning the rest of the sprint's work. Maybe someone like, oh, hey, I want to do this. Can we just go for coffee, or can we just meet for 5 minutes or 10 minutes so that we can review this? That kind of thing. Sprint review. Now, remember we've talked about the daily scrum. We've talked about the sprint planning. We are now going into the sprint review. The purpose of the sprint review is to inspect the outcome of the sprint and determine future adaptations. Now, why do you have the sprint review? The developers we've had at our sprint planning, they've been having their daily stand up, they've been working on the product. Now they are done with that product and they now want the stakeholder or the product owner to come and inspect what they have done. And if it's good, we now take it in, we adapt it, right? Then we now move to the next sprint. The Scrum team presents the results of their work to key stakeholders and progress toward the product goal is discussed. Like, oh, have we made the product goal? Like, are we in line with the product goal, or even have we met the sprint goal? During the event, the Scrum team and stakeholders review what was accomplished in the sprint and what has changed in the environment. And remember what I said before, that even as the developers are working, the work of the product owner is to go back into the market to know, like, oh, what is new, what has phased out, and then come back, still attend the daily scrum. Then at the end of the day, they are like, okay, let's see what you guys have done. Oh, good, good, good. Oh, I discovered during this and this and this. And remember that they say that the only person that can, stop the sprint at that moment, or if something is obsolete, is the product owner. So you really, oh, this thing is no longer in use. Maybe we can, have that discussion and stuff like that. Based on this information, attendees collaborate on what to do next. The product backlog may also be adjusted to meet new opportunities. Just like I mentioned, the sprint review is a working section, and the Scrum team should avoid limiting it to a presentation. It's not a presentation, it's collaborative meeting. Okay, the sprint review is the second to the last event of the sprint and is time boxed to a maximum of 4 hours for a 1 month sprint. So that means if it's a 2 week sprint, it should be 2 hours. For shorter sprint event is usually shorter. Sprint retrospective. The purpose of the sprint retrospective is to plan ways to increase quality and effectiveness. Perfect. Now we've done the sprint planning. We did our daily stand up. We've done our sprint review to inspect and adapt. Now we want to now increase quality and effectiveness. Okay. The Scrum team inspects how the last sprint went with regards to individuals. Okay, how did we do individually? Interaction, how was our communication? How was our collaboration? Processes, did we follow through? Did we follow through the Scrum framework? Tools, did we use appropriate tools, maybe Jira and stuff like that? And their definition of done. Okay, definition of done. Did we meet our definition of done? Expected elements often vary with the domain of work. Assumptions that led them astray are identified and their origins explored. So let's say that this could be like a root cause post-analysis time. Okay, we noticed that the product owner wasn't happy with one or two things. What happened? How did we stray from the actual goal? Okay, the Scrum team discusses what went well during the sprint, yes, what problems it encountered, and how those problems were or were not solved. Yeah, at times the problem may not be solved and be like, okay, let's discuss this during the sprint retrospective. The Scrum team identifies the most helpful changes to improve its effectiveness. The most impactful improvements are addressed as soon as possible. They may even be added to the sprint backlog for next sprint, for example, or maybe we need to be writing technical documents and stuff like that. We provide a time during the sprint to do that. The sprint retrospective concludes the sprint. It is time boxed to a maximum of 3 hours for a 1 month sprint, maybe 1.5 hours for a 2 week sprint. For shorter sprints, the event is usually shorter. Scrum Artifacts. Layman, Scrum documents or Scrum, whatever. So, Scrum Artifacts. Scrum's artifacts represent work of value. They are designed to maximize transparency of key information. So everything is clear, everything is open. Thus, every everyone inspecting them has the same basis for adaptation. Each artifact contains a commitment to ensure it provides information that enhances transparency and focus against which progress can be measured. For the product backlog, it is product goal. So artifact for the product backlog is the product goal. For the sprint backlog, it is the sprint goal. For the increment, it is the definition of done. These commitments exist to reinforce empiricism and the Scrum values for Scrum team and their stakeholders. So these commitments they exist to everything has to do with what we have experienced, to how to go about it, how to improve and all whatnot. Product backlog. The product backlog is an emergent ordered list of what is needed to improve the product. For example, the product owner wants to build a website that will help people to come order their printing products and get it sent to them at home. Okay, so in this case, the product backlog is an emergent. Now he now orders the list of what is needed to be done to achieve that website. Okay, in the product backlog, it is the single source of work undertaken by the Scrum team. Product backlog items that can be done by a Scrum team within one sprint are deemed ready for selection in a sprint planning event. So when they say something is ready, that means we have selected what we can achieve in this sprint during the sprint planning. So they usually acquire this degree of transparency after refining activities. There's always a time when we refine the product backlog items. We, put some below, we put some up according to the value and stuff like that. If that was in the first or second or third upload, so I talked about that. Product backlog refinement is the act of breaking down and further defining product backlog items into smaller or more precise items. Maybe during the sprint, it could be like the Scrum Master and the product owner they meet and they're like, oh, I think this product list is a little bit ambiguous. Let us make it simpler. Let us make it concise. Let us make it more understandable to those that would be working for us, okay, or those that will be using this. So this is an ongoing activity to add details such as description, order, and size. Attributes often vary with the domain of work. The developers who will be doing the work are responsible for the sizing. Yes. The product owner may influence the developers by helping them understand and select trade-offs. So when I say the sizing, it is the responsibility of developers to say, okay, do you know what? This will take us this amount of time and stuff. So they can use the t-shirt sizings, the Fibonacci theory and stuff, okay, to apportion sizes to products or product lists. Commitment, product goal. The product goal describes a future state of the product which can serve as a target for the Scrum team to plan against. The product goal is in the product backlog. So we have the product backlog. Remember, we need to achieve a product that would help us design. We need to design a product that will help clients come online to order print jobs and it will be delivered to their doorstep. The rest of the product backlog emerges to define what will fulfill the product goal. A product is a vehicle to deliver value. It has a clear boundary, known stakeholders, well-defined users or customers. A product could be a service, a physical product, or something more abstract. The product goal is the long-term objective for the Scrum team. Yeah, it is the long-term objective. Remember, you have the sprint goal. They must fulfill or abandon one objective before taking on the next. The sprint backlog. The sprint backlog is composed of the sprint goal. Why? The set of product backlog items selected for the sprint. What? As well as actionable plan for delivering the increment. How? So the sprint backlog is composed of the sprint goal. Why are we even doing the sprint? The set of the product backlog items selected for the sprint. So what have we selected that will help us to deliver in this on the sprint, as well as actionable plan for delivering the increment. So how are we going to deliver the increment, or how are we going to deliver this work? The sprint backlog is a plan by and for the developers. So the developers are the ones that create the sprint backlog. Okay, it is a highly visible, real-time picture of the work that developers plan to accomplish during the sprint in order to achieve the sprint goal. So they make it visible, they make it in a picture like it vivid. So it is just them trying to plan out their work, narrowing that into tasks. So whatever you have in the product backlog, they break it down so clearly that it will tell you when this will start and when this will finish. It will tell you the task they intend to accomplish. They can be using Jira, Asana, any one of these tools. Okay, even Azure DevOps. Now, consequently, the sprint backlog is updated throughout the sprint as more is learned. So, as they are going through their work, they are also updating the sprint backlog. It should have enough. Maybe they are done with this task. They tell you done. Maybe there are some minutes remaining. They just transfer it to another task so that they can continue their work. It should have enough detail that they can inspect their progress in the daily scrum. Commitment, sprint goal. The sprint goal is the single objective for the sprint. This is what we want to achieve on the sprint. Although the sprint goal is a commitment by the developers, it provides flexibility in terms of the exact work needed to achieve it. The sprint goal also creates coherence and focus. It helps the developers to focus on their work, encouraging the Scrum team to work together rather than one separate initiative. Everybody knows that this is what we want to achieve, so everybody focuses on this. The sprint goal is created during the sprint planning event and then added to the sprint backlog. So remember, we said this before, it is created during the sprint planning, then added to the sprint backlog. As the developers work during the sprint, they keep the sprint goal in mind. If the work turns out to be different than they expected, they collaborate with the product owner to negotiate the scope of the sprint backlog with the sprint without affecting the sprint goal. So something like, oh, maybe they found out something as they are going through their work, they now call the product owner's attention to say, oh, we discovered this. Can we do it this way? Maybe can we move this? Can we do this last, then so that we can achieve this first? Because we are noticing a dependency. They have that talk. This maybe, but no matter what happens, it doesn't change the idea of the sprint goal. Increments. An increment is a concrete stepping stone toward the product goal. Each increment is additive to all prior increments and thoroughly verified, ensuring that all increments work together. In order to provide value, the increment must be usable. Please, whatever they are calling increments, it is now when the developers, they've achieved what they need to do in the sprint, and they now have an increment. Okay, they have done their work and it's now an increment. So whatever they say increment, so it doesn't confuse you. Multiple increments may be created within a sprint. The sum of the increments is presented at the sprint review, thus supporting empiricism. However, an increment may be delivered to stakeholders prior to the end of the sprint. The sprint review should never be considered a gate to releasing value. Work cannot be considered part of an increment unless it meets the definition of done. For example, in a sprint, you were unable to achieve some task. You cannot present it to the developer, to the product owner. You have to, give it some hours, then it gets put back in the product backlog. You now allow the product owner to decide what to do with it. Commitment, definition of done. The definition of done is a formal description of the state of the increment when it meets the quality measures required for the product. For example, when what you have done has met the quality measures required for a product, that means it has met the definition of done. That is when your increment meets the quality measures. The moment a product backlog item meets the definition of done, an increment is done. The definition of done creates transparency by providing everyone a shared understanding of what work was completed as part of the increment. If a product backlog item does not meet the definition of done, it cannot be released or even presented, I said this before, at the sprint review. Instead, it returns to the product backlog for future consideration. If the division of done of an increment is part of the standard of the organization, all Scrum teams must follow it as a minimum. If it is not an organizational standard, the Scrum team must create a division of done appropriate for the product. Like, this gives your product value. It gives everyone that sense of, okay, this product has to meet this definition of done before we can even present it, before we can even say it's an increment. Okay? The developers are required to conform to the definition of done. If there are multiple Scrum teams working together on a product, they must mutually define and comply with the same definition of done. So maybe you can have multiple teams working out from the same product backlog items. You guys will have to share the same definition of done. And Scrum is free and offered in this guide. The Scrum framework, as outlined herein, is immutable. While implementing only part of Scrum is possible, the result is not Scrum exactly, because some will tell you, let's do Scrum, but you're not following that framework. Scrum exists only in its entirety and functions well as a container for other techniques, methodologies, and practices. And we have acknowledgement and all whatnot. And this is the end. Thank you so much. I hope this was of good use to you. Kindly comment, subscribe, like, and share. Bye.